The noisy campus cafeteria that afternoon was drowned out by the pounding of Yin's heart, which always seemed to change its rhythm whenever those dark eyes caught her attention. From a corner table shielded by the shadow of a pillar, Yin slowly sipped her iced coffee, keeping her usual neutral expression firmly in place. 3 tables away from where she was sitting, Jungkook stood with a stiff, upright posture. His handsome face was as cold as marble, completely untouched by the sweet smile of a girl from the arts faculty who had just held out a box of expensive chocolates toward him. Yin could already guess what was going to happen next, a routine she had memorized by heart since their first year in the business department. "Sorry, but I don't like sweet stuff, and I don't have time for things like this." Jungkook's voice was low, flat, and completely certain. The girl lowered her head in embarrassment, pulling the box back with teary eyes before turning away. Behind Jungkook, his 3 friends reacted in their own ways. Jaehyun let out a hearty laugh with his arms crossed. Minju patted Jungkook on the shoulder while dramatically shaking his head as if he felt sorry for him, while Yoonwoo simply gave him a knowing little smile. "You gonna keep staring at his back until your eyeballs fall out, Yin?" Mina, Yin's best friend and classmate, suddenly waved her hand right in front of Yin's face. Yin blinked, calmly pulling her gaze away from Jungkook's silhouette. She placed her coffee on the table. "I wasn't staring at him. I was just analyzing Jungkook's rejection probability pattern. His success rate is 100%. Seriously consistent." Mina let out a loud scoff, leaning back against her chair. "Stop using business terms to hide the fact that you're totally in love. You like him, Yin. Anyone with eyes can see it. The question is, when are you gonna stop being a spectator and actually do something? Even freshmen are bold enough to give him gifts every week. Are you seriously gonna let them be braver than you?" Hearing the comparison, Yin let out a soft sigh. "They're impulsive and rely way too much on their feelings, Mina. I'm a realistic person. As an only child carrying a lot of expectations, especially with my family background, it just doesn't make sense to waste my time on something that's obviously gonna fail. My mom's an internal medicine specialist, and my dad's a lawyer. Ever since I was little, they taught me to make decisions based on facts and empirical data. First fact, Jungkook is cold, private, and only hangs out with Jaehyun, Minju, and Yoonwoo. Second fact, he rejects every girl, no matter how pretty they are. So why would I lower my pride by going up to him just to get rejected? Because you never know unless you try." Mina leaned closer, looking at Yin with pleading, sparkling eyes. "But whatever. Forget about Prince Ice for a second. You don't have any extra classes this afternoon, right? Come to Hongdae with me." "Hongdae? What for? Shopping for clothes?" "Nope." Mina bit her lower lip, smiling in a way that suddenly made Yin feel like something was seriously wrong. "There's this fortune-telling cafe that's really popular over there. I heard the tarot reader and palm reader there are insanely accurate. Come with me, okay? I want to know if that senior from the law department is actually my soulmate." Yin stared blankly at Mina, as if her best friend had just started speaking an alien language. "Mina, are you kidding me? You're asking me, a business student raised by a doctor and a lawyer, to go to some fortune teller's tent? I don't believe in cards being randomly shuffled or palm lines. It's all just cold reading and psychological manipulation." "Come on, Yin, please." Mina grabbed both of Yin's hands, shaking them dramatically. "I'm just asking you to come with me. You don't have to get your fortune read if you don't want to. Just sit there and listen to mine. I'm too scared to go alone. Please, please, for our friendship since orientation." Faced with Mina's endless whining, Yin's wall of rationality, which had always been rock solid, slowly began to crack. She rubbed the bridge of her nose, feeling a slight headache coming on. "Fine, but remember, I'm only coming with you. I'm not spending a single penny to listen to some nonsense about the future." That afternoon, Hongdae was packed with pedestrians, filled with neon lights that were starting to glow beneath the evening sky. The faint sound of street performances drifted through the air, mixing with the spicy smell of food from the roadside stalls. Mina grabbed Yin by the wrist, pulling her into a narrow alley decorated with tiny lanterns. At the end of the alley stood a gypsy-style cafe with dark purple velvet curtains. The moment they stepped inside, the heavy yet calming scent of incense immediately filled Yin's senses, making her wrinkle her nose without even realizing it. They were greeted by a middle-aged woman dressed in layers of clothing, with plenty of silver bracelets wrapped around her wrists. Her eyes were sharp, as if they could peel away the thoughts inside anyone she looked at. Mina immediately sat down in front of the woman excitedly, holding out her hand to be read, while Yin chose to sit a little farther away, folding her arms across her chest in a defensive posture. For the first 15 minutes, Yin simply listened in silence. She watched as the woman read Mina's fortune. The fortune teller said things that Yin thought were way too general, about a confused heart, a man who was hesitant, and an opportunity that would come in the spring. In her mind, Yin gave a sarcastic little smile. Of course, she thought. Those were all standard guesses for a girl her age. What a joke. However, just as Yin was busy mocking everything in her head, the woman suddenly let go of Mina's hand. She slowly turned her head, staring straight through the dim candlelight directly into Yin's eyes. The atmosphere in the room suddenly felt colder and quieter. "You're laughing at me in your head, Miss Rational?" The woman's voice was deep and slightly raspy, echoing softly against the walls of the narrow cafe. Yin flinched slightly, her sarcastic smile fading. Still, she tried to keep her composure. "Sorry if I offended you. I just see things like this differently." "Of course you do," the woman chuckled softly, the sound more like dry leaves rustling in the wind. "You grew up under the shadow of scalpels that cut into physical truth and law books that define social truth. Your mom's a doctor who heals the body, and your dad's a lawyer who backs up logic. They taught you that everything in this world has a formula and a solid explanation, right?" Yin's breath caught in her throat. Her heart skipped a beat. She shot Mina a sharp look, suspecting that her best friend had told the woman about her family background. But Mina looked just as shocked, shaking her head frantically with wide eyes, silently making it clear that she had never told her anything. "How did you?" Yin's voice trembled slightly, the rational defense she had proudly built for years beginning to crack. "You can't hide that stubborn aura of yours, kid," the fortune teller cut her off, her wrinkled hand now pointing toward the empty chair beside her. "Sit down. Let's see if your future can be calculated with all that business probability of yours." A sharp sense of curiosity mixed with a little fear now swirled inside Yin's chest. Slowly, as if her body were moving on its own, completely outside the control of her rational mind, Yin got up from her seat and moved to sit in front of the fortune teller. I don't really have a specific question," Yin murmured hesitantly, trying to rebuild the last pieces of her logic. "It's just, will my comfortable life right now last for a long time? And what about my future in general?" The woman gave a faint smile and spread the tarot cards across the velvet table. Her nimble fingers flipped over 3 cards one after another. "Your life is gonna be filled with luxury and success, that's for sure. Not only are you an only child who's gonna inherit a lot from both your parents, but you've also got a brilliant mind. But the most interesting thing here isn't your career, miss." The woman tapped the last card, which showed a pair of lovers. "This is about the man who's gonna stand by your side, the man who's gonna be your husband." Yin frowned. "Husband?" "Yeah, a marriage that's gonna be filled with so much happiness," the fortune teller continued, her sharp eyes locking onto Yin's gaze. "You're gonna marry a man who loves you very, very deeply. His love for you will be just as big and overflowing as the love and protection your father has given you all these years. The way your dad loves you and spoils you, that's exactly how your future husband will treat you too." For some reason, a warm feeling spread through Yin's chest as she heard the prediction, even though she tried to push it away. She forced a small, awkward laugh. "That sounds pretty impossible. You already know I'm stubborn as hell and kind of a pain. But by the way, who's this poor guy who's gonna love me that much?" The woman leaned forward, her shadow dancing beneath the candlelight. "That's the most interesting part. This man isn't far from your life right now. Your orbiting rings have already crossed paths in the same place every day. And what's even crazier, you're the one who fell for him first. You've been secretly keeping it all inside, hiding behind that stiff logic of yours." Yin fell silent. Her breathing was starting to feel heavy. Her brain, which was used to processing data, now raced through every possibility, desperately trying to match the clues she had been given. "He has some very specific traits," the fortune teller continued in a whisper, her eyes staring into the distance. "His eyes are dark as a starless night, and he looks at the outside world so coldly, rejecting anyone who tries to get close to him. He barely talks, keeps to himself, and only laughs when he's with his 3 very loud best friends." Yin's entire body tensed, her fingers unconsciously gripped the edge of the table. "And one more thing." The woman smiled knowingly. "That man really likes hiding behind his oversized black jacket, walking with a straight posture but always keeping to himself, like he's built a wall of ice around himself. But trust me, behind that wall of ice, he'll be completely burning up from his feelings for you." The air in the room seemed to disappear. The ticking of the wall clock suddenly sounded deafening. Yin's eyes widened, staring at the tarot cards in front of her as her thoughts thundered like a violent storm. Dark eyes, cold and rejecting everyone. Quiet, 3 loud best friends, an oversized black jacket, and she was the one who fell for him first. Every variable, every criterion, every clue pointed to one name, one person she had only ever dared to look at from afar without ever having the courage to get close. Jungkook. The rationality that had imprisoned Yin for so long shattered in an instant. Her logical, reserved, and always playing it safe personality was suddenly replaced by a spark that struck the gasoline burning inside her chest. The fortune-telling seemed to hand her the key to freedom, breaking the chains of doubt that had held her back all this time. If that man, Jungkook, was destined to adore her, to love her as much as her father did, then why should she keep hiding like a coward? Yin swallowed, a faint smile that Mina could never have predicted suddenly slowly forming on her lips. The doubt that had filled her eyes moments ago was now replaced by a dangerous and daring confidence. Since that night at the fortune-telling cafe, the walls of defense Yin had built over the years collapsed completely. She threw her pride out the window, fueled by the delusional belief that the Ice Prince would eventually fall for her. If fate had already written that Jungkook would love her someday, then all Yin had to do was speed things up. Armed with that ridiculous way of thinking, Yin started doing things she had once considered completely unreasonable. Jungkook, wait, Yin called out loudly in the middle of the quiet campus library hallway, making the tall, silhouetted man stop in his tracks. Jungkook slowly turned around, his dark eyes staring sharply, looking straight into Yin's eyes. Jaehyun, Yoonwoo, and Minju, who were walking beside him, exchanged glances with raised eyebrows. I summarized Professor Kim's macroeconomics material. I saw you weren't in his class last week. You can use my notes, Yin said as she held out a blue-covered book, trying to keep the tremble out of her voice. Her heart was pounding like crazy, but she forced a smile. Jungkook stared at the book for a moment, then looked at Yin with a confused frown before his expression turned as cold as an ice block from the North Pole. What the hell was up with this girl? Why all of a sudden? I don't need it, he replied flatly. I've already got my own notes. And I don't remember asking you to be my personal assistant. Just take it. It could be useful as extra reference, Yin insisted, taking one step forward. Damn. Why was she suddenly being this aggressive? Yin silently cursed herself. I said I don't need it. Just mind your own business, Jungkook hissed, turning around without the slightest bit of guilt and leaving Yin frozen in place with her hand still hanging in the air. Jaehyun gave her an awkward smile before running after Jungkook. That rejection should have been enough to make Yin back off, but that damn fortune-telling seemed to have poisoned her common sense. Instead of stopping, Yin became even bolder. She became more and more unable to control her feelings, and she started secretly taking pictures of Jungkook while he was reading at a cafe, while he was playing basketball, and even while he was chatting with his friends. On her phone, she kept those photos in a hidden folder, staring at them every night with a smile on her face, imagining the man as her future husband. Her obsession blinded her to the boundaries of privacy. Yin started finding out where Jungkook's apartment was, and at the peak of it all, she recklessly drove her car, slowly following Jungkook's black sedan from the campus parking lot all the way to an upscale residential area in Gangnam. However, Jungkook was no fool. That afternoon, the gray cloudy sky hung low as Yin parked her car a little way from the entrance of Jungkook's apartment building. She had just reached for her phone to take one more picture when the driver's door suddenly got slammed against from the outside. Yin jumped in shock, causing her phone to slip from her hand. Behind her window stood Jungkook, his jaw clenched and his eyes blazing with anger. With trembling hands, Yin rolled down the window. Get out, Jungkook growled, his voice low but threatening, as if it could cut through the frozen air between them. Get out of your car, right now, Yin. Yin's legs felt like jelly as she stepped out of the car. The cold afternoon wind slapped her face, but it was nothing compared to the coldness in the man's stare. What's wrong, Jungkook? Yin squeaked, trying to put on an innocent face even as cold sweat began to dampen her palms. What do you mean? What's wrong? Jungkook let out a sarcastic laugh, one that didn't reach his eyes at all. He took a step closer, towering over Yin with an intense, intimidating aura. You think I didn't notice? You think I'm blind? Your camera lens always pointing at me in the cafeteria. Those stupid messages you keep leaving in my locker. And now, you followed me all the way to where I live? Yin's breath caught. It felt like all the blood drained from her body at once. I didn't mean to. You're sick, Jungkook cut her off sharply, his words stabbing straight into Yin's chest like a poisoned blade. I let it slide at first because I thought you were just some dumb girl who'd eventually give up. But this is too much. You're stalking me, Yin. You're acting like some crazy stalker. No, please, just listen to me first. Yin desperately grabbed Jungkook's jacket sleeve, her eyes beginning to fill with tears. The tears fought their way out, crushed beneath the shame that was swallowing her whole. I just like you. I have a reason. Jungkook roughly shoved Yin's hand away as if she were carrying some contagious disease. I don't care about your reason. Blind obsession or whatever the hell it is. I don't care. Your behavior is disgusting. The man took a step back, staring at Yin with undisguised hatred. Don't ever show your face in front of me again. Don't you dare look at me, and don't ever come near me. You make me sick. Jungkook turned around and walked away without looking back, leaving Yin almost collapsing onto the asphalt. Her tears finally broke free beneath the drizzle that had begun to fall. Shame, regret, and the realization of how stupid she had been hit Yin like a sledgehammer. The fortune teller had lied. The fortune telling was all. That man would never adore her. Hell, he hated her down to her very core now. Ever since that dark day, Yin completely withdrew. She avoided him like a coward, lowered her head whenever they accidentally crossed paths, and buried her feelings deep inside until graduation finally arrived and sent them down separate paths. Time passed without mercy. A year after graduating, Yin briefly worked at an investment and insurance company, but the environment filled with dirty politics and people constantly stepping on each other made her sick of it, so she decided to quit. With whatever determination she had left, Yin applied to Jinhwa Financial Group, one of the biggest insurance companies in Korea. When her acceptance letter arrived, Yin cried tears of happiness. The salary here was twice as high as at her previous workplace. This was her fresh start, a clean page waiting for her to fill it with achievements. But apparently, the universe had a seriously cruel sense of humor. On her third day at work, a small panic swept through the department where Yin had been assigned. Her division manager suddenly became busy preparing the room because the company's top executives were conducting a routine inspection of the operations floor. As a new employee, Yin's only job was to bring a stack of audit documents to the division meeting room and sit in the back corner in case copies of the files were needed. Yin sat stiffly, holding the folder neatly, her eyes staring straight ahead with a professional posture. The room's double doors swung wide open, and a group of top executives walked in. Yin's breath instantly caught, her body froze. At the very front, leading the group in a bespoke black suit that perfectly wrapped around his athletic frame, stood Jungkook. Unlike Yin, the man was definitely not new here, his authority and dominance, filling the room as a long-serving executive vice president, the absolute heir who was preparing to take over his father's position as CEO. As Jungkook sat down and began listening to the brief report from the division manager, his gaze casually swept across the room. At that exact second, his dark eyes collided with Yin's. A clear flash of surprise crossed the man's irises, a slight frown appearing on his forehead as he realized that a face from his past was now standing inside his territory. However, unlike the Yin from the past who would have definitely panicked, the Yin of today calmly broke eye contact, lowered her head deeply, and focused her gaze on the stack of papers in her hands with an expression as flat as a board. No emotion, no recognition. The days that followed at the office became a silent battlefield for Yin. She planted one absolute rule in her mind: avoid Executive Vice President Jian at all costs. If Jungkook walked toward the left elevator, Yin would turn toward the stairs. If Jungkook entered the office lobby, Yin would rather stand outside until the man got into the elevator. Yin only spoke to him during division meetings, and even then, she used incredibly stiff formal language. The third quarter projection report is already on your desk, sir. If that's all, I'll get back to work, Yin said one afternoon when she had to deliver some files to Jungkook's office. She bowed respectfully to a full 90 degrees, her eyes fixed on the floor, with absolutely no intention of looking at his face. Jungkook, who was sitting back on his executive chair, tapped his expensive pen against the glass desk. His eyes narrowed as he studied Yin, standing stiffly in front of him like a lifeless robot. For some reason, Yin's cold attitude and excessive formality kept slowly scratching at his pride. "Wait, Miss Yin," Jungkook called when Yin had just turned around. His voice was deep, echoing through the spacious soundproof room. Yin stopped, holding her breath for a moment before turning back with an expressionless face. "Yes, sir. Is there something wrong with the report?" Jungkook rose from his chair and slowly walked around his wide desk. The quiet sound of his shoes echoed across the thick carpet. He stopped only to steps away from Yin, towering over her. "There's nothing wrong with your report," Jungkook said, his voice dropping until it sounded like a dangerous whisper. His eyes stared sharply, searching for any trace of the careless girl who had once begged for his attention back in college, but finding nothing except professional emptiness. But something's wrong with the way you look at me. Like you're looking at a ghost. Or, like we never had any history before. You're avoiding me, Miss Yin? Yin gripped the folder in her hands until her knuckles turned white, yet her voice remained steady and cold as she looked up and met that stare head on. I don't know what you mean, sir. As far as I'm concerned, our relationship is nothing more and nothing less than that of a boss and an employee, and it requires complete professionalism. There is no history between us that's relevant to my work here. Jungkook's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching faintly at his temple. The man took another step forward, closing the distance between them until Yin could smell the sandalwood mixed with mint from his cologne. His eyes darkened, showing a storm of emotions that were hard to read as he slightly lowered his head to bring his face level with Yin's. You're really good at acting, Yin. But how long do you think you can keep running away from me in this building? I'm not running away, sir. Yin's voice broke through the suffocating silence in the room, cold and not shaking even a little. She held her breath, pulling her body back to free herself from the intimidation of Jungkook's towering shadow. Her sharp eyes locked onto her boss's dark ones with a courage born from an old wound. I'm just staying right behind the line you drew yourself back then. You want to know why I act like I don't know you? Isn't that what you wanted? Didn't my presence make you sick? Wasn't I just some disgusting, crazy stalker in your eyes? Jungkook's jaw twitched hard, his lips parted slightly, ready to throw out a defense, but his words got stuck in his throat when he saw the flash of pain that quickly crossed Yin's eyes. I remember every single word you said to me that afternoon, Mr. Jungkook, Yin continued, her voice dropping but cutting as sharply as a razor. And I made sure to follow every single one of them. I drilled it into my head that I'd never show my face in front of you, and I wouldn't dare look you in the eyes unless work required it. I'm here to work hard and make money, not to play out some old drama. So, if you're done having a problem with my manners, let me get back to my desk. Without waiting for the man, who was still standing frozen in place, to give her permission, Yin gave a brief bow, turned around with her back straight, and walked quickly out of the executive office. The mahogany door closed with a soft click, but the sound echoed deafeningly inside Jungkook's head. The man roughly rubbed his face. A long, frustrated sigh escaped his lips. He hated himself when he realized that the silence and professional boundaries Yin had built now came back to tear his sanity apart every single day. Ever since the confrontation in that room, the tension between them had grown heavier and more suffocating. A few weeks later, Jungkook had just returned from an exhausting business trip to London. Normally, he would have gone straight home to his apartment to rest, but for some reason, driven by some crazy impulse, the man instead walked into the office carrying several large bags filled with expensive snacks and artisan chocolates he had intentionally bought. He told his assistant to put everything in the pantry and announced that all the employees in the division could take whatever they wanted. Cheers and happy laughter immediately filled the hallway. The employees crowded into the pantry, scrambling to try the gifts brought back by the famously cold future heir, who turned out to be surprisingly generous. From the doorway of the pantry, while sipping his black coffee, Jungkook's eyes swept across the sea of people in front of him, searching for one silhouette that had somehow become the center of his gravity lately. But nothing. She wasn't there. Jungkook put his cup down a little too roughly, walked out of the pantry, and made his way down the rows of empty cubicles. In the corner of the room, illuminated by the bluish glow of a computer monitor, Yin sat with her back to the hallway, her fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. White earphones were plugged into her ears, deliberately keeping herself busy and away from the noise of her coworkers having fun. Miss Jiyeon, Jungkook called softly, stopping a female staff member who had just returned from the pantry with a box of chocolates. Why isn't Miss Yin hanging out with everyone? Jiyeon jumped when she saw her boss standing there. Oh, sir? Yin said she's focusing on revising the client's policy draft for tomorrow morning's meeting. I already offered to bring her some, but she said no. She said she doesn't like sweet stuff. Jungkook closed his eyes for a moment, feeling an invisible sting in his chest. She didn't like sweet stuff. That was the biggest lie he'd ever heard. Back in college, the girl had once bought him an entire box of strawberry macarons. Yin had always loved sweet stuff. She wasn't turning it down because of the food, but because of who brought it. The girl was rejecting anything that had even the slightest trace of Jungkook on it. A sense of curiosity that had slowly mixed with a subtle obsession made Jungkook unconsciously start paying closer attention to Yin. In the days that followed, he watched the girl through the office CCTV cameras, which he could freely access from either his laptop or iPad. He noticed how Yin would hide on the rooftop during her lunch break, secretly order a large pizza from a certain local brand, eat it with her cheeks puffed out, and then finish it off with fresh Shine Muscat grapes from her small lunchbox. During moments like that, when Yin thought no one was watching her, the girl's cold and professional expression would fade away, replaced by a small smile that made Jungkook's heart beat in a completely unreasonable rhythm. Until that night at the end of the month finally came, a nightmare for the entire division. The deadline for the annual audit report forced dozens of employees, including Yin, to work overtime staring at their screens until their eyes turned red. The clock ticked toward 10 at night. Heavy rain poured against the glass windows of the skyscraper, adding to the hunger and exhaustion filling the air. Suddenly, the division's double glass doors swung wide open. Several delivery guys walked in carrying stacks of boxes that filled the room with the mouth-watering smell of melted cheese and roasted meat. Behind the delivery guys, Jungkook's assistant followed with 2 large baskets filled with shiny green grapes that looked insanely expensive. "Hey everyone, Executive Vice President Jian sees how hard you guys have been working tonight," the assistant announced, immediately grabbing everyone's attention. He ordered dinner for all of us. There are tons of pizza boxes and fresh Shine Muscat grapes for dessert. Dig in. The exhaustion on the employees' faces instantly disappeared, replaced by excited cheers. "Wow, Mr. Jungkook seriously knows how to bring our energy back," one of the managers shouted. "Come on, guys, let's eat first." Meanwhile, on the 27th floor, Jungkook sat with his arms crossed inside his office, his eyes still fixed on the laptop screen showing the CCTV footage from the 20th floor, where Yin's division was located. He watched Yin, who had initially been stretching her neck, suddenly freeze when her eyes caught sight of the pizza box logo. The logo of the local brand she always ate on the rooftop. Her eyes shifted to the basket of Shine Muscat grapes. But once again, instead of joining everyone and grabbing some, Yin was the only employee who remained quietly at her desk until her fingers soon started moving across the keyboard again. This time, Jungkook's eyes stared sharply at the screen in front of him, his jaw tightening until the veins in his neck became clearly visible. His chest rumbled, an unfamiliar burning emotion beginning to crawl up his throat. He had swallowed his pride, gone out of his way to call that ordinary pizza restaurant himself, and searched for the best quality Shine Muscat grapes, all just to see the girl eat peacefully. Yet Yin chose to torture herself instead, forcing herself to stay hungry just to keep the wall of ice between them. Meanwhile, at her desk, Yin secretly held her growling stomach, feeling the sour taste of saliva gathering in her mouth. The smell of her favorite pizza was making her empty stomach desperately beg for food, not to mention those incredibly tempting Shine Muscat grapes. But she forced herself to hold back, refusing to let Jungkook see her and think she was still willing to accept his attention. She couldn't show that his gesture had touched her or that she was excited about it in any way. She didn't want Jungkook to think she was still hoping for something from him and end up causing another round of drama at this office. Yin needed this job. She was getting the highest salary she had ever received, and she wasn't about to let some cheap romantic fantasy destroy her career. Her stomach growled even louder. She grabbed her water bottle, took a long sip of cold water to trick her stomach, and went back to typing with her jaw clenched.